Hey folks, it's Lindsay Setchell here again from HM and HM International School of Horse and Hoof Care, and welcome back to another session of Lindsay Setchell's It's Not Rocket Science lectures, because it's not rocket science. All you need to do is observe, but observe the right things. Now today we're going to do a little bit more myth busting, and today we're going to be looking at rings. We're going to be looking at the rings in a horse's foot and what they tell us. But before we do that, I've got a public service announcement for you guys. HM are here for you, the owners. We are a service provider. We are here to teach you how to understand the foot in actually a very straightforward way. No messing, we're just going to talk about it in a very straightforward way. And how am I qualified to do that? Well, I'm a qualified teacher. I'm a qualified science teacher, and I've spent years teaching young people and young adults to go on and be scientists in one way or another. Vets, dentists, doctors, physios, all kinds of people that want to go into the science realm. That's what I did. I spent quite a lot of my time doing that, teaching them biology, teaching them chemistry. Biology and chemistry was really my thing. So I have a thing for it. And for the last 25 plus years, I've owned horses myself personally. And I've been able to observe through the lens of a scientist and through the lens of a biologist and a biochemist exactly what was going on in their feet, seeing thousands upon thousands of hooves. And I realized that there was a really big problem in the equine world. There was a massive disconnect between the veterinary profession, who were scientists who'd started off their foundation with somebody like me, gone into school, gone into university, and they learnt about pathologies and all sorts of different animals. But they didn't spend a lot of time on the hoof and on laminitis and understanding lameness. That they learnt when they left college or university and went to work in their chosen equine practice. Now every vet will admit that, because that's what happens. They get taught about hoof care really by a farrier, but there's a disconnect between the vet and the farrier, because the vet actually has never been taught how to trim, how to really observe a foot. Not just that, but to go from 6-week intervals and see how that foot changes to understand the natural foot. And the farrier has never been trained, some of them perhaps, but most of them have never been trained in understanding pathology and understanding the healing pathway. They've been taught how to put shoes on, they've been taught how to trim, but not from a basis of a natural foot. Never from a basis of a natural foot. Many people will come on here and argue that fact, but it's actually true. That's it then, that's that done. Right, today we're going to talk about rings in Lindsay's It's Not Rocket Science lectures. So, hoof wall rings. What are they? So here we've got a hoof, here we've got a hoof, and what we end up having is we have these, we tend to have these rings going round, don't we, like this. And we see these rings and we're told that they are growth rings. Well, in their purest sense, you could think of them as growth rings, because you could actually check, if you had a bit of a deep ring here, you could monitor that ring, and you could monitor the growth rate of that ring, indeed, and that would give you a hoof growth cycle. So a hoof growth rate cycle. It would tell you over a period of time how quickly or slowly that hoof is growing. So you could, if you like, call them growth rings. But why are they there? Well, they're there because some kind of biological interruption while they were being made. And who makes them? Well, it's the horn tubules. These little jiggers that live here in the coronary band, and there's an awful lot of them, and they make the horn tubules that go down the hoof wall in one long, constant, hollow horn tubule that are all glued together with intertubular horn. And every time we have these biological interruptions, it's coming from the gut. It's coming from a problem that happened in the gut. First and foremost, the microbiota that live in the gut, these tiny little microbes that are inside that horse's gut and inside our gut and have this incredible influence over the body. They are amazing. But sometimes what happens is they get out of balance. And when they die, for whatever reason, they enter into the bloodstream and they cause issues. And one of the issues they cause is down here in the hoof. And then the hoof responds by putting out these rings. In the domestic world, actually, it's quite rare to find that perfect setup where you never see a ring on your horse's foot. Now, some people will tell me my horse hasn't got rings, and then I look at them and I can see these very, very faint little ripples. They may not be intense, but they're faint little ripples. It's really quite difficult. When you go out into the Great Basin or on the Eurasian steppe, where Mother Nature designed the horse to live, then you'll find that their hooves, they don't have these rings. They don't have these inflammatory event lines, because some people also call them event lines. We know if you keep a herd of animals together and they're all on the same system, you'll find they all have exactly the same rings coming down. Now that's interesting, and that should point you in the direction of the gut, because all of those animals are all on exactly the same system. So they're all having the same rings coming down. And that was fascinating for me, watching that happen as my herd grew, seeing all of their hooves all with the same hoof rings, but some of them were a little bit more intense and some of them were faint. You couldn't really see them. Nowadays, it's a thing. We try to not have any hoof rings. It's important. And my horses have occasional faint rings coming down their hooves. It'd be a lie if I said to you they never have anything, all my horses have no rings, because that would be a lie. They live in a domestic environment. It's not a pure environment for them, for their species, and so occasionally they do have rings. But it's the intense rings that you want to be bothered about. So when the rings start getting very, very deep, and not only do they get deep, they get very, very close to each other. And very occasionally you'll have a situation where you'll get, if you've got an unpigmented hoof, you'll have a situation where you'll see some redness around a ring, and then sometimes you even might get an abscess that pops. And then as that abscess comes down, it comes down with another ring, and there's the hole, and there's the ring. And that's how it works. So we can read quite a bit from those rings. We know if our horses are having regular, really intense rings, that something really is not right in that horse's diet. If they're very faint, we know that the diet isn't totally optimum. Something's happened, but it's not intense. So I want to talk to you about the intense ones. I want to talk to you about laminitis again, because we're on that run. So let's just rub all that out a minute. Because let's talk about the laminitic foot. Because there's this long-held belief that if a horse has laminitis, yes, it's going to have hoof rings, but that the hoof rings are going to be divergent. And by that, I mean where you've got your foot. Oh, I did it without a line. I've got your foot, and they're coming down, and they're very close here, and they're starting to do that. Okay, they're starting to diverge, indicating some changes, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Now, if you have a foot that is a healthy foot, or a foot that is even not healthy, like a laminitic foot, but you keep the toe on the ground down here, boop, boop, then what you'll find is that the rings don't diverge. Now, they could be laminitic, and some of them could be quite intense, but the rings don't diverge. So, first and foremost, that was a bit of a myth, that divergent rings indicate a laminitic foot. Well, not entirely, and I'll show you why. Because it's all about hoof growth rates. The hoof growth rate, or hoof growth cycle. So if you take a foot, I do that because I like to try and work out where I'm going. Let me come down here. So if we take a foot like this, now this is a typical foot where it would have had its hoof wall properly on the ground. That's how it would have had it. But unfortunately, the hoof wall is being relieved. So in fear of lever forces, we want to remove all that toe. I've talked about that, and I will talk about it again, and I will do an entire lesson just on lever forces. But lever forces, extraordinary lever forces, don't happen to tear the lamina. Mother Nature's not that silly, and Mother Nature worked out that biology is going to trump lever forces, and all those very important intracellular and intercellular bonds that are inside are not going to be easily torn apart. And if you've ever ripped a capsule off a cadaver hoof, a dead hoof, you'll know it's horrendously hard to do. And all our students moan about it when we ask them to go and do it, and they're like, not again, it's such hard work. That's because it's really difficult to tear those bonds, even with a very compromised laminitic hoof. It's got lots of stretch. It's very difficult to break those bonds. So we'll do another lever forces lesson another time. So we're talking about rings, and specifically at this moment, we're talking about divergent rings. So there we've got the coronary band. So this horse here with its foot has got quite a high heel, and they've been chopping off the toes. So now we've got our rings coming down, and what's happening is the rings are doing this. And if you go and look at any laminitic foot, you'll see that's had its toe chopped off. You'll see it. That's what it looks like. And so immediately we're told, oh, that's because that foot's very laminitic and that's why it's got those rings. Well, you can do that with a foot that actually isn't that laminitic, but you can still start chopping the toe off and you can still cause this to happen. You can cause this divergence in size, let's do that in a different colour, between the rings. Okay, so you've got a tiny little bit here and big bit here and tiny little bit. And so people have said, oh, it's because it indicates that it's got founder. No, it's all about hoof growth rates. And that was my cat jumping in a cupboard. It's all about hoof growth rates. Now this part of the foot is growing at its standard rate. Or if you like, it's growing faster than this part of the hoof, which is growing quite slowly now. So these divergent rings are diverging because of this disparity with the hoof growth cycle, the hoof growth rate. So this is going at a standard rate. The heels are growing like they should. They're responding to their environment and they're growing at the rate that they should. But this here, this part of the hoof wall, isn't. That's now slowed right down. And the reason it's slowed down is because in biology, organisms work on feedback. That's how all organisms work. That's how we keep our body temperature. I'll make a K. That's how we keep our body temperature right. That's how we keep our blood sugar levels right. All of these things are the body trying to even things out, because it's all about a big word called balance. Now, balance can mean different things to different people, and we talk a lot about balancing the gut, and we talk about all sorts of different balance. But in this way, we're talking about the body having balance levels. Everything needs to be balanced because organisms work like that. Plants want to be balanced, humans want to be balanced, the environment inside, and it's no different to a horse and his hoof. The hoof wants to be balanced. Now, I have a saying always with my students and those that come to our workshops. I have a saying that don't be so naive to think that you can do something to one part of the hoof, i.e. here, and the other part of the hoof doesn't know about it. Because the brain, and here it is, here's the, oh my God. That's a terrible, terrible picture of a brain. I am sorry, but the brain is connected to this all the time. It knows. In fact, they're even doing research right now where they know that the brain doesn't just know about what's going on in the tissues, it knows what's going on inside the cells. It's Really amazing what they're starting to learn about the brain and the tissues and how it all works and the cells and getting right down to cells and molecules. It knows something is wrong down here. And I'll tell you what else knows, the little papillae. Because those little papillae that are creating those horn tubules, which are effectively creating the horn, which you see as the rings, these guys here, up in this area here, have slowed down their production. These guys right down here, the ones that live down, I'll carry these ones that live down here, they're just like normal. They're just getting on with life, doing their thing. But these guys down here, they've got a problem. And the problem is they have no feedback. So consequently, what happens is the foot begins to bunch. It starts to look like you've got these divergent rings because this is no longer in balance. The hoof no longer is balanced in terms of its growth rate. That's important, really important, because the more we keep chopping off these toes and slowing this growth rate down, the more of a problem we've got, because these start to get out of whack, the heels, because they look like they're growing too fast, when in actual fact they're not. They're growing at the right rate, and they don't get cut back enough because they're not trimmed back to the hard sole plane, the HSP. And so what happens is the horse's foot goes up and up and up, and the toe keeps getting chopped off and off and off, and P3 in there is having trouble. It's having real difficulty inside the foot. And then over time, what we have is something that we've talked about before, and I will go into another lesson on this, which is we start to get osteonecrosis, which is bone loss. Now, bone loss comes from starvation. Bone loss isn't happening because of the lamina being inflamed. People will tell you that. It isn't. This is through starvation because of pressure, but that is another lesson. I just wanted to talk to you about rings, and I wanted you to understand how rings work in a horse's foot and how divergent rings work in a horse's foot. Now, if we came along, I'm going to rub all this out now. If we came along, as we do, and we rehab ponies the right way, so that ponies and horses have all their foot on the ground, no matter how long that toe is, it's balanced underneath, but the toe needs to be touching the ground. What happens is we come in and we have a heeling angle like this, and then we've got a bit of a long toe, but it's on the ground. P3 is in the right position. We're just waiting for this to grow out. Gradually, it will gradually grow out. And the ordinary foot will be left, and we're keeping the heels here on the ground. So what happens when we rehab horses, let's just get rid of P3 a minute so it's not in the way, is that we get we get rings that do this. They don't diverge. They don't diverge at all. They don't. And the reason they don't diverge is because they are getting feedback. It is a biological organism, and it needs feedback right here to these little guys all the way up there. Next time you look at your horse's feet, check their rings out, because they're bound to have some rings. They may be faint, but check them out. Check to see if they're diverging or if they're staying standard, because if they are staying like this, you know that the growth rate is balanced. You know that the growth rate in that foot is balanced and that you've got good feedback going on. If you've got a foot where you've got the rings and they're doing this and they're well, that wasn't very good, was it? Let's get rid of that. You've got a foot where they're doing this and they're diverging like that, then you know this problem is occurring, because the toe is no longer sending feedback up to the papillae up at the coronary band. And in some instances, when we have this, we have pinching going up here. It pinches because it starts to there's so many rings that cannot just basically relax and start to have a normal hoof growth rate like it should. They start to pinch, and that causes even more problems, and it can cause problems way up here because most of the time when this is happening, when you have these divergent rings, hang on, let's draw that foot, there we go. Let's draw that foot. It's more like this. Most times when you have these divergent rings, and I know that's not exactly, but you're getting the idea, right? You don't have a healing angle, because one of the beliefs for lever forces, one of the bases of the beliefs for lever forces is the fact that, in fact, it's not healing. The foot isn't healing. And every time you come an x-ray, there's even more rotation, and that makes them lose their heads, and it's, oh my goodness, there's losing connection to the lamina. No. It's all being confused now. The reason it's not healing is just very, very simple, and it's the owner that can fix it. It's the diet. It's the diet. It's always the diet. Don't be thinking that your farrier or your trimmer has got a magic rasp or a magic shoe. They haven't. If your horse has laminitis, it's because there are diet issues. And I'm not saying that you need to go leaping down to the agricultural stall, down the pink aisle, and start buying bags of bag feeds and supplements because you're going out of your mind because you've not got the right... No. It's all about stripping it back. And we said that in our last lesson. Strip it back. That's the important thing. Back to basics. So if this is happening in your horse's foot, they have big divergent rings and the rings are pretty intense. You know the diet is causing problems in their gut, which is causing problems in their feet and the rest of the body. It's a whole horse problem. And you also know that the hoof care is wrong. That isn't the right thing to do to a biological structure belonging to a biological organism that needs feedback, because that is how it works. Feedback and balance. And if you don't get that balance right in the horse's foot, and we're not talking about balance down here, that's bad enough, because that often, most of the time, is an imbalance either. But if you are in a situation where you've got this going on, you know that you've got problems with the feedback in that foot. And that, my friends, is going to affect this. The healing pathway. Because unless you start allowing that foot to do what it wants to do and let that foot relax and not be absolutely terrified of extraordinary lever forces that don't exist to tear the lamina apart, doesn't happen mechanically. If you don't, you are going to get a foot that becomes more and more and more compromised. And this is what we see all the time. Go and check the rings on your horse's feet. Are they diverging or are they all nice and even? If they're nice and even, thumbs up. But try and sort that diet out to calm those rings. But if they're diverging, the hoof care is a big problem. Don't do this. Don't interrupt the feedback, because you'll interrupt the balance. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you again for the next lesson soon. Bye-bye.